Alright, hello there YouTube. So in this video, this is going to be a part 4 video on how to um, add weapons and objects to your avatar's hands by gestures on your little mouse pad on your controllers. So anytime you hit peace, high five, or handgun, or whatever it is that you're trying to do as a gesture, it will instead pull out a weapon or an object out of your avatar. So let's go ahead and get started. So the avatar that we're going to be working with is the Hillbilly from Dead by Daylight. I've already ported him, I've already exported him. You can see my other videos on how to do that. Um, so this is obviously from Dead by Daylight. What we're going to be importing is his weapons, more specifically his hammer and his chainsaw. I'm not going to show you how to rig the chainsaw because it's going to be the same as the same method as I'm going to show you when we just do the hand or the hammer itself. I may do the chainsaw instead, whatever I feel like doing while doing this video. So we're going to go into Blender. This is basically, you would find the hammer, you would export it using UModel. The weapons are usually located with the slashers folder. If you're familiar with Dead by Daylight, they'll be located in the slashers folder. But if you already have some kind of object from another video game, whether it be a object or a weapon, this is going to be the same method for all games. It doesn't matter what mesh you're working with, it's all the same really. So we're going to go ahead and hit File, because I've already scaled this down, I've already renamed it up here, so everything's all set and ready to go. So File, Export, and FBX, and you would basically save it. We're going to import it into our weapons folder. So if you recall from my part 1 video, if I recall, or maybe my part 2 video, I showed you guys how to kind of set up your folders in Unity to be a little bit more tidier. So I've set mine in Avatars, Models, Dead by Daylight, Weapons, and Hillbilly weapons, and here's where I have my weapons that I'm going to be working with for the Hillbilly. So this is where you would import the models for those weapons. These are just static meshes. They do not have any type of armature on any of these, but as you recall, I did name it armature because it still has vertices on there. All meshes have vertices, so I just call it armature for the sake of it. So let's go ahead and grab our hammer model once you've added it into the your project window, and you've also textured it and everything, because obviously you'll have a materials folder, you'll have to add textures to it, etc., etc. You get the idea. So here's our hammer. I already scaled it to the appropriate size that I want to be working with it. We're going to have to put it in his hand here. So let's go ahead and rotate it. So it's going to be 90 degrees. This is going to be 0 degrees. Now we're going to bring it up to his hand. So where it should be seated on his hand is where this tape is, by the looks of it. So we're going to bring it up, move it over a little bit. So this is probably where he's going to be holding onto it. Alright, and now we're going to rotate it to kind of look like he's holding the actual weapon a little bit better. Probably like that's probably how you'd be holding it. And then move it back some, maybe move it forward, and there we have it. So it's positioned in a fairly decent area on his hand for what we have to be, how we're going to be working with it. Alright, so what we're going to do is put this hammer into the Hillbilly's armature. So we're going to go into our drop down, Hillbilly, joint, character, pelvis, torso, torso B, torso C, and I should mention that these are the bones that are going to be named in Unreal. Most of the bones are all named the same, at least in my experience with Unreal 4 engine models. You'll have a clavicle left, clavicle right, neck A, 0, 1, etc., etc. The bones are always going to be labeled the same, or maybe it's just Dead by Daylight in general, but all other games seem to have the same names that I've been working with. So for your avatar models, they're going to be remotely the same name for the armature. So I mean, you just got to find wherever the hand bone is located. So in my case, though, the hand bone will be located in the joint clavicle right, the right shoulder, right elbow, and here's our hand joint right here. So here's our right hand, and we're going to drag and drop the hammer into that hand joint, and there it is. So before we get started though on the animating, so we can make it so you can pull out the weapon in VRChat, what you want to make sure though is if you go into your avatars, models, wherever model that you are working with, avatar-wise, make sure that you've already set the rig as humanoid and you've already given it the IK support that it needs, which is basically configuring the model and making sure everything's set as you recall from my part 2 video. Otherwise, you will not be able to animate the avatar properly. So, once you've done that, make sure you've done that, and then we can get started. So, with our hillbilly, we're going to go ahead and duplicate this. And we're going to call this hammer trigger. Because we're not going to be dealing with this avatar when we upload it, but we're going to go ahead and hide our first hillbilly avatar, because that's the avatar we're going to be working with. And then we're going to be working with this one instead. So under animation, we're going to hit create. And if you're not already in that folder, which in this case I'm not, you want to make sure that you're in your weapons folder when you create these animation triggers. So these folders are the same as in Unity. That's all it uses off of. So if we go into Dead by Daylight, weapons, hillbilly weapons, this is the folder we want to be in. And we're going to call it hammer trigger. And then we're going to hit save. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're going to want to set this hammer on active. So I haven't showed you yet, but this hammer right here that we have in our first model, we're actually going to hide it. This is going to be hidden throughout the whole entirety. But once we give this a trigger, if we add a property and then hillbilly joint character, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find that weapon or object that you're trying to set as an active object. So let's see if I can find it. And hammer, and there it is. So here's our hammer. If you click down on the arrow, you want to make sure it's set as active. So what this means is when you spawn in the world with your avatar, this hammer isn't going to be visible unless you hit the gesture that you set this trigger to, and then it tells it, okay, this is when the object, the mesh, is active. Here's the hammer now. So if you say you hit, for instance, the high five gesture, then your hammer would come out instead and not a high five, and that's what it's signifying. So when you use that gesture, it's going to set the object as an active object at that point. And then when you click in off the gesture, then the object is hidden again, if that makes sense. So once you've added that property, you want to add another property, and this is where it's going to start getting really tedious and fun. So you want to add every single finger bone that you're going to be working with in the animator. So we're working with the right hand in this instance, so we want to set it's going to be right hand. So all these ones, right hand index, starting from right hand index 1 all the way down to right hand thumb spread. All these need to be added if you're dealing with any of the finger bones. If you think you're not going to be using any of these finger bones, then, or some of the finger bones, then you don't have to add them. But usually I'm always messing with a few of them. Usually you can get away with not using any of the spreads, but maybe the thumb spread is the one that you want the most. But I've usually gotten away with not using any of the finger spreads, but just the thumb spread. So I'm going to just keep adding these here, so bear with me. It takes a little while. I'll show you a quicker method of doing this though, but the method involves you having to at least do this one time. So as long as if you've done this once, you'll never have to do this again after I show you what I'm about to do next. So you can make a little shortcut. At least I never seen anybody do this shortcut, so kind of discovered it on my own. Honestly, they really do need to make an option where you can just shift left click all of these, so you can just add them all at once. This is really tedious. I hate doing this. For a while I was doing it this way until I found the shortcut method. So it made avatars a pain in the ass to animate because of this, and you know, now that I have the shortcut method, I can create avatars fairly quicker. So I'm not doing anything special with them other than putting weapons in their hands and adding audio onto them for the most part. I don't technically like to deal with animations for this game because IK kind of breaks a lot of the animations for this game. So okay, I'm trying to look for that right hand thumb stretch, but I can't seem to find it. I think I went past it. Oh, there it is, right hand thumb spread. That's the one I was looking for. Okay, so I found every single one now. These are all the ones that you're going to want to add to your property when you're animating. It's kind of a pain in the ass, I'm not going to lie. So what you want to do though, I'm not going to show you the shortcut method just yet, because what you're going to want to do here is mess with these values here. How you see there's 0. So, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this, but be sure to delete these keys right here. So click in the gray top area right here and hit delete on your keyboard. You're going to see your avatar do this, and don't mind the head disappearing. It does that with some meshes, that it's still there. It's going to make your avatar basically go into this crouched position. You're on the right path, so I should have mentioned to do that, but there you are. So your right hand index stretch. So if you move this value, you'll notice the finger moves. So you're going to want to move this value to where you want it. But before you can really mess with a lot of these values, you're going to want to make sure that your hammer or your object or weapon is seated in the correct position. Otherwise, you're going to keep fighting with these fingers where you want them. So make sure that you are off keyframe recording mode. You want to make sure that's clicked off. And then under your hammer trigger, go where your hammer is. You want to make sure you edit this further to the position you're trying to get it in. So he'd be probably holding it somewhat like this. I'm going to probably take it, maybe pull back a little bit. See where it's seated on his hand. Yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass when your avatar keeps disappearing on you. I've not found a fix for that. I don't know why it does that, but it does that to me sometimes. The mesh is still there. It's just something with Unity where it bugs out. It's like the material or something, I don't know. Well, there you go. That's probably a fairly decent location where it should probably be seated on his hand there, probably in the center of his palm. Alright, so you're basically going to want to mess with these values until it's in the correct position. Now, once you've had all these positions that you want it to be in, so, I'm going to show you the shortcut method of doing this. You have to at least do this once. Everybody's going to have to do this once. But once you've saved this avatar and you've saved the scene, you can always refer back to this scene, your hillbilly scene, for instance, or whatever avatar you're working with. And if you go back under this animation here, you go under animation, and you see all these values right here, you already have all the values set for you. Like, you already have all the fingers that you're trying to manipulate in whatever positions you want them in. So, for instance, I'm going to show you the shortcut method now instead of doing all this. It's going to be tedious. You're going to see me just sitting here just toying with this. So, I've already got an avatar that's already done, that's already animated in terms of the right hand fingers. So what I can do is I can go into scenes, and I can basically pull up, let's say, we'll go with Trapper. How's Trapper sound? So here's our Trapper here. And if we go under our machete trigger, which would be essentially the same as our hammer trigger here, and then we go under animations, you see how I already have values set already, and I already have all the, yeah, I'm going to have to fix that, but I already have all the hands and stuff already positioned for me. So all I have to do is just click on the top here and hit Control C on the keyboard and copy these values. And then if we go over to our hammer trigger, and then we basically click on the gray area again and hit Control V, these values are already now in the same position as the trappers. Though we will have to edit it a little bit, because obviously we're dealing with a little bit of a larger weapon, but you can see that we already have all of our keyframes already enabled in here. We didn't have to basically keep going into the add property, go into animator and keep adding all of them. We already have them all. So if I did this again, so say I deleted all these keyframes, and then I click up here on that gray part, hit Control V, and that's what I'm talking about. So you have every single one now for me. So that's just a little bit of insight for you guys. If you at least have one avatar that's already set and ready to go, you could just copy the animation keyframes off one avatar and then basically Control paste them on another avatar, and you've already got them all there. So we're going to go ahead and remove our Trapper though. We do not need him. I just needed him for the animation keyframes. Alright, so we're going to have to manipulate this a little bit more though, and I'm obviously going to have to move the hammer some more because I've realized I'm not really happy with that position still. So you're going to be constantly doing this kind of stuff, guys. You're going to have to constantly keep moving your weapon around until you get it in the right position that you want it to be in. It's a never-ending thing, honestly. Now that looks a little bit better. So now we can go back into our animation and we're going to start editing the fingers a little bit better. So let's say around maybe right there. Usually I'm always messing with the number ones in the fingers. I'm not really ever really messing around with any of the other ones. I might mess around with this one a little bit more. That one looks a little bit better. Okay, where's that ring finger? It's called ring. There it is. And then the little finger. So obviously I'm still going to have to move this hammer still. Like I said, I'm still not happy with this. Probably about right there, maybe. And then we're going to move the little finger again. Maybe like that. That looks probably pretty decent. We could also probably bring down the hammer a little bit more too. Maybe like right there. And we have to move the thumb now. Not sure how I want him to hold it. Sometimes you can make it look like he's kind of just resting his thumb against it like this. Or you can make him just look like he's grasping it more so. I think in the game he's more so grasping it, so we're gonna move it down a little bit. Yeah, look, he usually holds it up like that. Maybe the spread's a little off. Just, nah, maybe not. It's kind of funny with these models of these avatar models. The thumbs always look a little off. I can never really quite get these just right how I want them. As you can see, that kind of looks a little awkward how he's holding it, but you know what? It works. It's good enough, honestly. Doesn't really bother me all that much. But so that's the idea. So once you've gotten your keyframes in the correct position that you want them to be in, you think you're fine, you think you're done. All you have to do then is basically click on the gray part again up here. So this little checkbox square thing. And then you want to hit Control C on the keyboard like we did when I showed you the quick method. And then click on the very first keyframe here and you want to hit Control V. So what this is going to do is, the reason why we did this is, say you didn't add these keyframes here, the copy of these keyframes here. Well, what's going to happen is you go into VRChat, you click on the gesture that you've set your weapon or your object to, and then you let your finger off that gesture. Well, your hammer is still going to be in your hand. It's not going to go away unless you keep like screwing with a bunch of other little gestures on your control pad. Then it eventually finally goes away. It kind of just gets stuck in your hand. So what this allows it to do is it allows it to tell it, okay, go away after you've let your finger off that gesture. I don't know how many times I've forgotten to add these extra keyframes while making my avatars, and I have to make an update because of that. So yeah, make sure you add these keyframes right here. So that's essentially it. I mean, after you've done that, there's just one few final steps really. So the position. If we go into our hammer here and we click on this cog right here, we want to copy these positions because obviously we've been editing this hammer on the animation trigger, but we have not edited it in our first avatar here. So we want to click on our hammer in the animation avatar and we're going to hit this cog. We're going to hit copy component. So what it does is it copies all these values. Whoops. It copies every single one of these little values right here. And then we want to go into our first avatar and go into that hammer and click the cog and hit paste component values. Alright, so once we've done that, we're going to enable this again, and we're basically just going to hide this this trigger because all it's there for is a trigger. It's not an avatar we're using. It's just there so we can edit the avatar and we can tell it where we want the avatar to be holding the weapon or the object. All right. So if we go into our project and we go into our weapons folder, let's see. It's called Hillbilly. There it is. We have hammer trigger and hammer trigger. I don't know what this one does. I've never figured out what this copy of it is. It's something about a metadata or it's a controller. That's what it is. Duh. All right. So we got to make an override for our animations. If we do not make an animation override, then we cannot basically tell our avatar in VRChat what gesture is what. It just uses the default gestures. So to find the override, we have to go into, it's going to be in, I believe it's in editor. Okay, that's where it's at. Okay, so you want to go into your assets here, and you want to go into VRC SDK, and then you want to go into your examples, and then you want to go into animation, and you want to look for this custom override template. That's the one that you're going to want to grab. And if you hit Control D on your keyboard on it, it creates a copy of it. It says custom override empty1. Otherwise, you could just search for it in your assets. Just type in custom override empty, and it'll pop up as well. So we're going to grab this, and we're basically just going to drag and drop this copy we made into our, if I can find it, keep going, keep going, keep going, Hillbilly weapons. So if we go into our Hillbilly weapons now, we will have that custom override. But since I already made one and I've already renamed it to what I want, I'm not going to be using this, so I'm just going to hit delete. So here's the override. You can name it whatever you want. I just call it usually Hillbilly Weapon Override, so I'm going to actually rename this because that's what I've started naming all my overrides. So we're just going to call it Hillbilly Weapon Override. And then we are going to grab this play animation, and we're going to grab it and put it into any gesture or any animation gesture that you want it to go into. Usually the ones that are ideally you want to put them in is handgun or rock and roll. These are the two that nobody really ever uses on the touchpad. So let's see here. And there you have it. So that's essentially all you're doing now. I would also show you how to do the chainsaw, but I would have to animate the left hand because in the Dead by Daylight he actually wields it in his left hand. But the method is the same as the hammer. You would basically, in the animator, you're going to want to set all of the finger bones and all that stuff to make it hold to where you want it. You can also animate the stomach or whatever it is you're trying to animate to get it to do. It's not just hands that you can work with. You could work with pretty much anything with the animator. So just keep that in mind. You can really experiment on your own and come up with useful, cool ideas. So I'm just kind of laying down the foundation for you guys. Alrighty, so our last and final step is basically, again, we want to make sure that this hammer is hidden, because when we use that gesture on the touchpad, that it's going to pull out that hammer. So again, just reminding you guys, make sure that hammer is set to hidden. And then we're going to go to our first avatar here and make sure that we have an avatar descriptor, which this one does not, but we're going to set that. I'm going to make sure that the camera is seated right in his face, about right there and right there. Okay, so in your avatar descriptor, you want to grab your Hillbilly Weapon Override, and you want to put it in the custom standing animation, as well as the custom sitting animation. You don't have to do the sitting animation if you don't want to, but at least for standing, you're going to want it. And that's essentially it, guys. That's as simple as it gets. So just for a future reference, say you want to add multiple objects or other things to other different gestures. So for instance, if we go back to our Hillbilly override, like our chainsaw for instance, so I would basically duplicate my Hillbilly again, and I would call this chainsaw trigger. And then I would create an animation on that, and then I would animate it using this avatar, just as we did with the hammer trigger. And then once I have the animation in here, obviously I don't, I just have the hammer trigger and that's it. But once I've named it in the weapons folder as chainsaw trigger, I will have two animations in here after we're finished animating it, and I would grab the play animation and put it with maybe rock and roll, and that way I'll have my hammer trigger here, and I'll have my rock and roll trigger right here, and the rock and roll trigger will pull out my chainsaw rather than that gesture. So like I said, you don't have this isn't just used for one override alone. You can set multiple animations that you've used on this override for this avatar. So you don't have to keep creating multiple overrides, and plus you can only use one override per avatar. So just letting you guys know if you had any questions on that. So, hopefully that kind of cleared it up. Obviously, this video was kind of a redo of my part 4 because I feel like I was confusing a little bit of you guys, so I apologize. I was having a lot of bugs and weird issues. I don't really know why Unity was just not working properly with me. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. I'm very passionate about horror 3D objects and horror things in general, so yeah, I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. So yeah, have a good one, guys.